Okay, so let's take a value of goods or services to be 133,000, 1,333 and 33 cents. Let's take that value. So this was the value of the imported goods or services. So the VAT that we would have likely claimed on that would have been 133,033.33 times 15%. That would have been the value. We're just trying to elaborate. That was the value, and the VAT that we're claiming on that would have likely been 200 when we round off that amount. It would have been 200. 133.33 times 5. It's basically 200. Alright, round it off. So this is 200 input VAT that would be able to have been claimed in a normal 100% VAT situation. So this would have been 100% of VAT in that situation. And this is taking the good or service to be coming through to an operation or a business which is a taxable supply 100%. Right. So that would have been the VAT that we would have claimed. So now let's take a situation where we are a VAT vendor that makes partly taxable supplies and partly not, partly taxable supplies. So we make taxable supplies of say 60% taxable and exempt supplies of 40%. VAT. So what does that mean? So in terms of this VAT amount, that means the VAT that would have been able to basically pay as an outflow, it would have been 100 rands initially that we would have paid as an outflow, and the input VAT that we would have basically been able to claim back, it's not 100 rands, sorry, it's 200 rands over here because we're taking this value. So the VAT that would have been levied would have been 200 rands in a normal situation, but we can only claim 60% in terms of us having partly supplies in our business. So 60% of 200, that would have been basically 120 rand, 120 rands in terms of the inflow that we get. So the net result in terms of VAT that would have been payable in this instance would have been 80 rands. Right? 8 rands. That is from the perspective of us having to have partly making taxable supplies so far as us being in the supply of goods and services. Whereas, and this is for goods, let's just say goods, partly supplies. Whereas now with services, we've said that only be VAT if there would have been a non-resident or there would have been exempt supplies. So we do not agree that in terms of exempt supplies, what kind of VAT would we have claimed? What kind of VAT would we have claimed? We would not have been claiming anything because what is it? It's an exempt supply to us. For services, remember, we don't apportion anything. We basically don't apportion anything because we don't apportion anything. We're either going to claim VAT or we're not going to be able to claim VAT. So for import of services, there's only VAT if there's exempt supplies or there's no resident. So in this instance, there's exempt supplies of how much? Of 40 rands, or 40%. And 40% of 200 bucks is an outflow of how much? An outflow of 80 rands to us that we have to pay over to SARS. Would we be able to claim back any VAT. There's no VAT that you can claim back because it's an exempt supply. So we can't claim anything back because it's an exempt supply already. So because it's an exempt, it's zero. So what is the net effect that we actually paid? The net effect that we actually paid is 80 rands. Right, you see. So the main thing why SARS would come up with such a funny requirement of there will only be VAT on an import of services if it's coming from a non-resident or if it's for an exempt supply. So in that instance, if that would not have been claimed. So in that instance, we're basically in the same outflow position between that supplies, partly supplies taxable goods, and in terms of the goods side, whereas with a service we run straight to the portion that doesn't basically recognize that if there's no non-vendor and if there's an exempt supply, which is the case here. So the net effect is the same. So what are we saying? We're saying with the goods side, it uses the gross approach. Whereas with the services, we use the net approach, basically. Net approach. Because we agree, if this was a normal 100% VAT vendor, so far as the vendor being in the business of goods, it would have been 100%. So they would have claimed back, 200. They would have been levied 200, and but they would have been able to claim back 200 as well. So that would have given them a net effect of 0. Whereas with a good, we've already spoken about, there will always be VAT with a good, with services, sorry. So there will always be VAT. So they would have been able to claim back 200 as well if it was a normal 100% situation for them to actually be in that service if it was not an exempt supply in the provision of that service. So they would have been able to claim back the 200 rands, which would have been the levied VAT on that item. Whereas if they are not in an 100% situation where they are also making exempt supplies, they would not be able to claim back any part of that exempt supply, which is why they get VAT on it. And that's why we say this VAT will never be claimed back, never claimed back, because it's an exempt supply. So SARS is basically saying, let's cut to the chase. We're not interested in the normal transactions. Let's cut to the chase. If he's not involved in taxable supply, he's got exempt supply in his business, therefore he'd not be able to levy VAT on that transaction. That's why we're going to get our VAT, and that's why you'll never be able to claim back that VAT because it's an exempt supply, or if it was a non-resident. So this is the main precaution that you must be thinking about in terms of import of goods and services, because it's a normal situation for us to get into to start realizing that obviously an import of a service is difficult to administer from a SARS perspective, because anybody can communicate with anybody from any given country outside of South Africa, and they particularly be given a person within a South African legislature, advice of some sort, which we cannot obviously trace. So in that instance, we'd not be able to trace that. Whereas if it was an exempt supply of a service, that would likely be traceable. I would imagine that's why they've also come up with a principle like that. And whereas the exempt supply portion is definitely going to be a taxable supply. I mean, not a taxable supply, but it's going to be output VAT that has to be paid over. Output VAT that has to be paid over by the buyer. And it will never be claimed back, as we've just elaborated. So, very important principle for the supply of import of services, which is something you must always look out for. All right then.